Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, Maths Made Easy with Terry in 10 minutes, okay? In the last video, we talked about coordinate system. So basically, it's a way of identifying. The first number is the X, the second number is the Y, and if it's a three-dimension, you have a third number, which is the Z, okay? So please review previous videos. So we're going straight to find the distance between 2 points. Now, some textbook will call it the length of a segment of a straight line. So in some cases, it can be called the length of a segment. All right. Now, what do we mean length of a segment or the line segment? In some cases, it's called the line segment. So a line segment is a portion of a straight line that directly connect two given points. Okay. So basically, what I'm saying is that a line segment, okay, a line segment is the portion of a straight line that connects, okay, or let me put directly, connects two given points. Okay, so that means unlike any line, it does not just extend off to infinity forever. Is that okay? So if I have, to make it easy, if I have 2 points, so I have, let's say, point A. So we talked about point A. Let's say it has X and Y coordinates. Point B has X and Y, okay? So for me to differentiate both of them, let me call this is X1, Y1, and let me call this X2, Y2, all right? This is a two coordinate. Well, and also we also have point C and point D, okay? And let's call this, maybe it's a three coordinates. So this is X1, Y1, and Z1. And this is a three coordinates. So let's call this X2, Y2, and Z2. All right. So a line segment is that line that just directly connects two of them. So this is it. So this line that connects point A and point B is what we call a line segment. So let's call it line segment AB. All right. And the line that connects C and D directly, let's call it line segment CD. So that means these both of them are line segment. And also now we already have this segment now, and the question wants you to now find a distance between both of them. All right. Now the distance is basically talking about the length of AB or CD. Is that right? And usually we use Pythagoras theorem to get that, but I'm not going to go straight to finding how do you do it. But basically, when you finish solving and doing the Pythagoras theorem, you find out that the distance will be equal to, if it's a two segment, like AB, is going to be the square root of x2 minus x1 all squared plus y2 minus y1 all squared. If it's a two dimension. Now, if it's a three dimension, okay, if it's this is a two dimension, okay. Now, but if it's a three dimension, the distance is going to be exactly the same thing. It's just that you're going to add a z component to it. Is that okay? So it's going to be x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared plus z, okay, z2 minus what? Z1 or what? Squared. Okay, so you'll notice as well that it does not matter if you have negative numbers. Remember when we talked about the coordinates, when you're going to the negative, you're going to the left, it's negative, or when you're going to down for the y, it's also negative, right? You know, it does not matter here because when you square it up, it's going to become positive. So that means the answer you always get in your distance will always be positive. And now, how do you now solve this question? The three rules, okay? I always have three rules. So remember, I always tell you the reason why I talk about the rules is that so that when you're revising your notes, you can know what I actually did in class. So the first thing is that you then have to identify your x1, okay? You need to identify which is your x1 and y1. X1. So you have x1 and y1, and also you need to identify your x2 and y2. That is for a 2-dimension. In some cases, it might be a 3-dimension, so you need to identify your x1, y1, and z1, and you need to identify your x2, y2, and z2. So if this is a 2-dimension, you have to identify this. So this is for a 3-dimension, and this is for a 2-dimension, all right? So you have to first identify which one, all right? Then when you're done with that, you then have to substitute into the formulas. So then you have to then substitute the values into the formula. So if identify the x1, y1, x2, y2, you now have to substitute into the formula. So if you look at this, for instance, you have the formula for a 2-dimension is x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. For a 3-dimension, it's x2 minus x1 squared. It's exactly the same thing, but you have to add a z to that. The way you've substituted the formula, the next thing then you have to do is that you then have to simplify, okay? Now, because you will notice as well that we have a square root sign, you always do the square root at the end. So the square root is the last thing you do, all right? Always do the square root the last thing. And also, it's possible that your answer could be in sorts form. So if you've not reviewed my videos on sorts, it's a good time to go back and have a look at the 7 rules of sorts. So you have to go back and have a look at that. But it's possible that you could get your answer in a sort form, all right? Then the next thing is that when you've done that, you simplify and you solve and you get an answer. So what I will do now is that we're going to pick some examples. So before we pick an example, just to remind you, when you have 2 points, if the first point and the second point, the first point has a coordinate, which is the x and y, which is a 2-dimension. The second point has also a coordinate x2, y2. The difference of the x, square it, plus the difference of the y, you square it, and you find the square root sign. That will give you the distance in 2-dimension. In 3-dimension, it's exactly the same thing, just that you're adding the difference of the z component, the square of it. Is that okay? So we're gonna pick an example now so that we can solve, so that we can just practicalize what we just learned now. So let's assume that we have this example here, and the question said, what is the distance, okay? What is the distance between 2 points? A and B, okay? Whose coordinates are 5, 3, and 8, 6, respectively. All right, so let's assume we have this question now, and we are told to find the distance between A and B. All right, so the first thing to do, like I always tell you, you have to look at the steps. You have to first identify which is your x1 and y1, x2 and y2. So from this, you can see that this is a 2D, all right? So you only have the x and y component. So the step 1, we're meant to identify. So that means this is gonna be, x1 is gonna be what? So remember I said the x is the first one and the y is the second one. So that means the x1 is gonna be 5, the y1 is going to be 3, and the x2 is going to be 8, and the y2 is going to be 6. So x1 is going to be 5, y1 is going to be 3, okay? Our x2 is going to be 8, and our y2 is going to be what? 6. Now, the next step, the step 2, I said we need to then substitute the values in the formula, right? And remember, for the formula, the first thing I told you for a 2-dimension is x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 all squared. So that means we're going to substitute it here. So we're going to be, the distance is going to be equal to the square root, okay, of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus what? y1 squared. And that will give us the square root of the x2 is what? 8 minus 5 all squared plus y2 is 6 minus 3 all squared. So usually you can also make this your y2, x2, y2, and this your x1, y1. It does not matter, all right? It will give you exactly the same thing. But usually for me, I have a bias. I was picking the first point as my first point and the second one as my second point. But you can switch it up. You can try it and you see you get it the same answer. Then when you're done, step 3, you simplify, you press your calculator, and your distance, you should get an answer, should be 3 root 2, okay? And that will be the answer for that. So the distance between point A and point B is going to be what? 3 root 2. All right, so let's pick one more example. Let's assume in this case now, we're told to find the distance. So we're told to find the distance, okay? We're told to find the distance of a point. Let's say point P that have 7 and 2 from the origin. So now, from the origin. Okay. Now, step 1, what do? Step 1, we said we need to identify which is the x1, y1. So we need to know what is the x1, y1, and we also need to find the x2, y2. Okay, good. Now, this question is a little bit tricky, but you can also solve it as well. Now, we're told the origin. But remember, I told you something in the last video about origin, that the coordinates for origin is what? 0 and what? 0. Very good. So that means if you know the coordinates of origin to be 0 and 0, then we can then solve this now. So that means our x1 is 7, our y1 is 2, and our x2 is 0, and our y2 is 0. So we can write 0, 0 here, and we can write 7 and 2 here. Step 2, we then apply the formula. The distance is going to be equal to the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 what? Squared. And that will give us the square root of x2 is 0 minus 7 all squared plus 0 minus 2 all squared. So you can see in this case, it's going to be positive because remember we have the square root sign. So regardless, you will get the same answer. All right. Then when you solve this, step 3, you press your calculator for that. So it's going to give you 7 squared plus 4 squared. And that will give you the distance is going to be equal to the square root of 53. And the answer you should get should be the square root of what? 53. So we're going to pick one more example. So basically, you have to first identify which is your x1, your y1, then you identify which is your x2 and your y2. So to get the distance, you just apply the distance formula, and you should get the same thing. Number 3, I have this example here. What is the distance? What is the distance between, okay, between, we have P1 to be equal to 1, 2, and 3, and P2, okay, and P2 to be equal to 0, minus 5, and 8. All right, so you can see in this case now, unlike the previous one, we are having a 3-dimension. In the previous one, we're having a 2-dimension where we only have the x component and the y component. But in this case now, we're having both the x component, the y component, and the z component, okay? So the first thing that you have to do is that you have to do the first step. You have to identify each of these components first. So we have the x1, y1, z1, and we're going to have x2, y2, and z2, okay? So let's go. Let's find it out. The first thing you do is that for the first one, so that means this is going to be our x1, our y1, and our z1. And this is going to give us our what? X1, our y1, and our z, sorry, x2, I beg your pardon. y2, and z2. So this is going to be, so y1 is going to be 1, 2, 3. And now x2 is going to be 0, -5, and 8. Step 2, we're going to find a distance now. But now this case, because we're having a 3 component, so it's going to have both a z attached to this now. So it's going to be square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared plus z2 minus what? z1 all what? Squared. And that will give us square root of x2 is what? It's going to be 0 minus 1 squared plus -5 minus 2 squared plus 8 minus 3 all what? Squared. Then step 3, when you then apply this now to solve, when you press this in your calculator, your final answer for the distance will now become 5√3. So I prefer to put this in the sort form because for these questions, usually the sort is going to give you the most accurate value. Is that okay? Like what we talked about in sorts, we're going to give you the most accurate value. So I prefer to have this in sort form. It's easier to work with than the other one. Okay, let me just pick one more. I feel like just picking one more and just using the same thing like a 3-dimension. So let me just pick one question on a 3-dimension with the origin to just round it up. So in this example here, I have find the distance. Okay, I have found the distance between Q1 and point Q1 has 3, 1, and 2, and the origin, okay? And the origin. Is that okay? So now we're asked to find the distance between Q1, which is 3, 1, and 2, and the origin. So as usual, like I told you, the first thing you have to do is to identify each of the points that you have. So we have x1, it's a 3-dimension, so we have to have x1, y1, and z1, all right? Then we also have to find x2, y2, and what? z2, all right? So what do you have to do then? So we have to do is that we have to then solve each and every one of this. So you have to first identify which one. So definitely this is going to be my x1, my y1, and my z1. Now we are having origin as well. Remember I told you origin, at point of origin, all the points are what? 0. So for a 3-dimension, all the points are going to be 0. So the coordinate system for that will be 0, 0, 0. So that means the x2 is 0, the y2 is 0, and the z2 is also what? 0. So it's going to be 3, 1, and 2, and the x2 is going to be 0, 0, and 0. Step 2 now is to find the distance. So the distance is going to be the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared plus z2 minus z1 what? Squared. And that will give us the square root of x2 is going to give us 0 minus 3 squared plus y2 is 0 minus 1 squared plus the next one, z2 is 0 minus 2 all what? Squared. And step 3, when you press this in your calculator, the answer you will get will be the square root of what? 14. And that will be the answer for that. So basically, that's how you find distance. So when you have distance, the first step is to identify your coordinates. Is it a 2-dimension? So you have to find the x1, y1. Then you find the x2, y2. Then when you found it, then you substitute to the formula. So if it's for a 2-dimension, is that it's going to be square root of what? x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus what? y1 squared. But if it's a 3-dimension, it's going to be square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared plus z2 minus what? z1 all what? Squared. All right, and that will be that for that. So now we found the distance between 2 points. The next video, I'm going to talk about how do you find the midpoint. All right, so like I said, if you've not subscribed, try as much as possible to do that so that when I upload new videos, you'll be the first person to know. All right, thank you very much. So I will see you in the next video where we're going to talk about midpoints. I'm going to talk about the concept of how do you find midpoints. So now we found 2 points, okay, point A and point B, all right? We found the distance between both of them, but now we want to find how do we find the middle, the midpoint between both of them. And I'll talk about that in the next video, okay? So I'm going to see you soon, and be sure to make sure that you practice questions, okay? Practice from the textbook is very important, or the worksheet. And if you have any questions, just let me know. You can send me an email or you can stop me and I'll get back to you. All right. Thank you very much.